Hi everyone, I'm Erin,
Whoa,
and this is not
my YouTube channel. Let's get started. My childhood dream was to do my PhD at MIT. And I got here, and now I quit. So, what happened? It was definitely not a lighthearted decision, I can promise you that. I would like to share today my journey from being a failing student in Croatia to attending MIT and Harvard. Then I'm going to talk about why I quit my PhD, and finally I'm going to talk about what I'm going to do next. The goal here is to give you an alternative perspective on the education system and even talk about the purpose of doing a PhD in the first place. Now, let's go back some 28 years. I was born in Germany in a normal working class family, and at the age of 5, my parents decided to relocate from Germany to Croatia to work for an NGO. Nowadays, when you think about Croatia, you might be thinking of all these beautiful sunny beaches, but trust me, back then, the country was just recovering from the civil war of Yugoslavia and it was complete chaos. Chaos. It was complete chaos. I think that's how I pronounce it. International schools were way too expensive for my parents, so I had to go to a local public elementary school. The problem was that I didn't speak a single word of Croatian. So the next few years were a really big struggle for me in every possible way. I was very shy and awkward and really struggled to make friends just primarily because I didn't speak the language well enough. In middle school, I developed huge behavioral issues, ranging from small things such as just throwing stuff at my teachers all the way up to blowing up several windows at night of my middle school with some little self-made explosives. Okay, not these kinds of explosives, these were actual bombs from the war. It's kind of a miracle that I still have all 10 of my fingers left. Not surprisingly, I got kicked out of school after school after school because I was driving every single teacher crazy. At the end of 8th grade, it was time to apply for high schools. And these applications are very competitive because there exists one extremely prestigious high school in the capital. By a combination of luck, some last moment efforts, and a lot of help from my parents, I somehow got admitted to this most prestigious high school. Honestly, in hindsight, I think every single parameter was somehow stuck in my favor. Anyways, here I was all of a sudden in 9th grade surrounded by Croatia's smartest kids. And one thing that particularly stood out to me were all these kids that went to math and science and informatics competitions in middle school and as a result get admitted to this very prestigious high school. I always looked up to them and admired their intelligence, but at the same time I felt like I was just not intelligent enough to ever compete with them. Unsurprisingly, I was the worst student in the entire class by a really large margin initially, but at some point I got really interested in physics, so all of my classmates that had been competing in math and informatics, nobody in physics, so I felt like this was kind of a safe space where I could try to become good at without really competing with them directly. And I kind of developed a little obsession with physics, just, solving a lot of problems every single day, exploring the depth of nature and all the little secrets. I thought it was really exciting, and for the first time I actually felt passion for something that I'm doing here. Long story short, to everyone's surprise, after a few months of preparation, I didn't just qualify for the state competition, which was my initial goal, I actually won a national physics competition. And 1 year later, after some really hard work, I actually won a bronze medal at the International Physics Olympiad as the youngest participant from Croatia ever. Just before starting my last year of high school, I heard about MIT for the very first time. MIT was, and still is, the #1 university in the world for science and technology. At that point, I realized that MIT would be the only place that could really satisfy my high-minded ambitions. I read anything I could online about the admissions process to MIT and decided that I would do anything, and I repeat, anything to get admitted. And that was just the point where I crossed the line between just being extremely ambitious and being borderline insane. I had no plan B. For me at that point, the entire world became black and white. Either I succeed and get admitted into MIT, or my whole life is a failure. A completely unhealthy mindset. I had already done everything I could for the physics Olympiad. How loud can people be? I had already done everything I possibly could for the Physics Olympiad. However, due to some translation errors from English to Croatian, and keep in mind I still didn't really speak English at that point, I only won a bronze medal again at the Physics Olympiad. And despite having perfect SAT scores, despite having won a national award for the best high school graduate in the entire Republic of Croatia, I got rejected from MIT. I talked more extensively about this whole story in my video about my life principle success that you can watch over here. With no plan B and absolutely no money to afford living and studying in another place, my only option really was to study at the local University of Zagreb. To be honest, I was completely devastated. Felt like none of my hard work had really paid off. It was still stuck in Croatia at the same place, while other people were going to MIT and prestigious universities, doing fancy internships at Google or Apple with all doors wide open to them. I felt stuck, like in a dead end. After some time, I decided to drop out of university because I simply felt like I wasn't pushing my career in the right direction by staying in Croatia. I somehow got a bit lucky and started working for the New York City-based hedge fund company. Completely crazy story that I made a video about that you can watch over here. And I also spent some time in California doing machine learning research. My friend and I invented a new type of machine learning algorithms that, to my great surprise, ended up getting quite a bit of traction. At this point, I decided to reapply to MIT, but this time to the PhD program in computer science. Arguably, that's MIT's most prestigious and most difficult department to get in, a lot more difficult than getting into undergrads. However, luckily at PhD level, they don't discriminate against non-Americans. Now, keep in mind that at this point, I still didn't have a bachelor's degree because, well, I dropped out of my undergrads, and also didn't have any connections or anyone to advocate for me at MIT like a professor, something that is extremely important. But yes, this moment finally came. The moment I had been working my ass off for the past 8 years, basically sacrificing most of my personal life and happiness for. It was January, freezing cold outside, and I had just had the most stressful month of probably my entire life. I had just arrived at my parents' place in Croatia. It was already quite late. I was walking up the stairs to my bedroom when I received an email from MIT saying that I got admitted. It is hard for me to even describe the emotions that I felt at this point. I mean, think about it this way. I had worked the last 8 years of my life, since the age of 15, basically day and night to accomplish this. I had so many drawbacks, so many unfortunate moments and things that were just completely outside of my own circumstances. And all of a sudden, it happened. I got admitted to MIT. On my first day when I arrived, I was probably the happiest person on the entire planet. I actually started off at Harvard University, which is right next to MIT, because I was supposed to be co-advised between Harvard and MIT for my PhD. I would often just walk around Harvard and MIT meeting some of the most brilliant and interesting people I've ever seen in my whole life. Sometimes I would just sit down in this famous Widener library at Harvard just to study and watch people around me. Does that sound a bit creepy? Yeah, that sounds a bit creepy. I would often just sit down on one of the old benches with my laptop and think about who else sat on these benches before me. People like Barack Obama, Theodore Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates. I sat there realizing that all of these people had at some point been at the same place as me. And now all of a sudden I was there with the same resources available to myself. For the first time in my life, I felt like there was really nothing that I couldn't accomplish if I played my cards right. Now compare this to 12 years ago when I just got kicked out of middle school. At that point I thought that my life's best case scenario would be that I do some random office job. Obviously nothing is wrong with that, but the world of the powerful and rich and successful people in this world just seemed completely inaccessible to me. And yet, here I was, at a place that I had been dreaming about for so long. So this enthusiasm lasted for a few days. You see, up to this point, I'd been completely obsessed with getting into MIT, to a point that was very unhealthy. And for all of these years, I thought that my key to happiness in life was being at MIT. But no, at that point I realized that my true inner goal was really just to prove to myself and everyone around me that I could get into MIT. I wanted to show that no matter what, no matter how hard it is, no matter how many people or bad luck try to hold me back, that I would be able to accomplish my goal. And indeed, as I started my PhD, I was still excited, but in my mind, this was a chapter that was already completed. Mission accomplished, end of the story. So what was the next challenge? It was such a weird feeling. For most of my adult life, I had been chasing my North Star. Whenever I was disappointed or sad or needed motivation, all I had to do was follow that needle on the compass pointing towards my North Star, towards MIT. And you know what happens when you pull out the compass on the North Pole? It loses direction. The needle just randomly starts spinning around with no place to point towards. That's kind of what happened to me when I got into MIT. I had spent the past several years of my life just moving from country to country, constantly chasing something better, something bigger. And I was actually excited about finally having some peace in my life, to live in one place and focus on doing one job, my MIT PhD. However, my mind just couldn't accept that. What was the new North Star for me? Just sitting there and doing my PhD and graduating? Well, hell no, that just wasn't big enough. I needed to chase something huge, some big goal, some better objective. The needle in my internal compass just completely lost directions here. Luckily, I ended up with a really good PhD advisor. He was very patient, so I wasn't really forced to work on some boring PhD project that I would hate. But on the other hand, this is also a bit tricky because having so much freedom can be a bit overwhelming. My PhD advisor is very hands-off. That meant that very often I was stuck reading some extremely complicated papers on quantum computing or artificial intelligence on my own. And I hate reading. Even just reading a menu in a restaurant without pictures is too much for me. So you can imagine I would spend sometimes 3 or 4 days just staring at a complicated paper without making any progress at all. To be honest, at that point I started feeling really stupid. It felt a bit like I needed someone to constantly hold my hands and guide me step by step through everything I wanted to do. But annoyingly, I couldn't get started with my PhD research because there just wasn't anyone to help me. And the fact that everything was remote at the beginning of the COVID pandemic just made everything much worse. I realized that the reason why I was struggling was exactly the same reason as back in middle school. It's because, at least I thought so, I wasn't intelligent enough, I wasn't disciplined enough. Nowadays I realize that, at least in my personal opinion, intelligence is completely overrated and doesn't matter as much. But it is true that I wasn't disciplined enough, and I'm still not disciplined enough. Yeah, you wouldn't really expect to hear that from me, but it's true. I'm not very disciplined, and I have never been. The thing is, I'm just not able to force myself to sit down and focus and study for something that I'm not excited about. And isn't that exactly what discipline means? Well, I don't have that. However, one thing that I am extremely good at is developing a passion and almost obsession for achieving certain goals. Once I've locked in the target, that North Star of mine, I don't even need discipline to force myself to work hard. In fact, it was lack of discipline that often made me unable to stop working. I know this sounds very paradoxical, but especially in high school, when I was solving physics problems, it was completely true that I just lacked the discipline to stop solving physics problems, start hanging out with my friends. Discipline goes both ways. And next time you're struggling to work hard and focus, remember, you may not just lack discipline, what you may really be lacking is a clear goal and vision for what you want to accomplish. Back to my PhD. I wasn't really making a lot of progress, everything was very slow, and one thing that I didn't mention so far is that already just before my PhD, I had actually started my very first company in the digital marketing space. And what I noticed during that process was, for the first time in my life, it wasn't just the end goal that I was completely focused and obsessed about. I was actually genuinely enjoying the journey of starting a company. However, I still had a PhD to finish. And after a lot of positive encouragement from my PhD advisor, who was being really nice to me, I knew that if I spent another 2 years focusing on my PhD, as much as I disliked it, I would eventually finish and graduate and earn that PhD. And I genuinely tried pursuing that path for some time. But then towards winter last year, I just started getting unhappier and unhappier. Spending Christmas and New Year in Cambridge is just really sad because, it's dark and cold and almost everyone is gone spending time with their families. Around that time, I also made my video that got quite a bit of traction called My Whole Life is a Mess that you can watch here. This was the very first time that I actually opened up about my feelings and how I felt with my, objectively speaking, good life. The main reason why I was so unhappy was just because I realized that over all these years I really neglected friendships and people around me. The video actually got quite a lot of traction with so many people commenting and writing me later that they felt exactly the same way but just never knew how to express it. If you've never watched that video, I really encourage you to have a look after this video. Anyways, generative AI started making more and more progress and I really started feeling like there could be a lot of startup potential here. I had been making and breaking a lot of different startup ideas over the years with a lot of my colleagues and friends, including my now co-founder Emily Moo. I started working on a legal tech startup called Marvery. So I was working on this throughout spring, trying to find an exact market opportunity that I could work on, while simultaneously doing my PhD at MIT and also doing a minor in business administration at Harvard Business School. It's been pretty stressful, but a very fun and exciting journey so far. I've vlogged a lot of this in my ongoing startup vlog series that you can see over here. And honestly, I just found myself really excited to work on a startup again. It's by no means relaxing. I mean, I have 12-hour non-stop meetings and stuff like that going on all the time, but it just gives me that concrete goal and drive in life that I was just lacking while only doing research. Realistically, there was just no way of really working on a startup successfully while pursuing a PhD. So I really had to make a decision at this point. And while it wasn't an easy decision, especially given that I had already invested about 2 years in my MIT PhD, it was just something that was necessary. I wanted to share my story about my MIT PhD for a few reasons. Well, first, because I think a lot of you found my channel initially through my day in a life video at MIT, or maybe through one of my how to get into MIT videos that I recorded recently. And two, because I think there are a lot of you out there thinking about doing a PhD at some point, or maybe doubting their decision. You know what? I'm not discouraging anyone from doing or not doing a PhD, but what you should know is it's not wrong to question something that you may have already invested a lot of time into. So if you're currently thinking about whether or not it makes sense for you to do a PhD, chances are you probably shouldn't. Because for a lot of us, it's just a default thing to, after high school, go to a bachelor's degree, then get a master's degree, then a PhD and so on. But I really think that a PhD shouldn't be any kind of default, especially in STEM. If you're not certain that you want to become a researcher specifically, you should not do a PhD. Quite a number of my now former colleagues at the PhD program at MIT actually had careers before starting their career. Some of them were consultants at McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group, and others were engineers at Google or Tesla. And they realized that their real true passion was research. So it made a lot of sense for them to actually do a PhD. And specifically, these individuals are actually the best, most successful PhD candidates that I know. But if you are not certain that you want to become a researcher or university professor, why delay your career? Because that's really what a PhD does. It slows down the time until you become an actual part of the workforce. In some way, it even delays you growing up because you don't obtain all the necessary skills that you actually need in life. And yes, if you have a PhD and get the job in industry later, you may be able to skip a few years and get promoted a bit faster. But the reality is, someone who joined at the age of 22 directly from a bachelor or master's degree, in most professions will be able to be ahead of you even after many years to come. Do I regret having started my PhD at MIT in the first place? Absolutely fucking not. Because this was my ticket to moving to the United States and meeting some of the most intelligent and brilliant people that I've ever met in my life. Also, I was able to do my minor in business administration at Harvard Business School, which is also where I met my other co-founder Connor. And also I built an incredible network of people who are now supporting me at revolutionizing the legal industry. Right now, despite all the struggles and ups and downs, I'm happier than I ever was before. I'm glad that Harvard and MIT enabled me to get where I am right now, and I'm also glad that I quit my MIT PhD to start a startup. In conclusion, do not default to doing a PhD. There's so many incredible things that you can do in life outside of academia. And if you realize that research is really the one thing that you want to do, you can always go back and get your PhD. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this. It's been around 9 months since I last made a proper scripted video like this one right now. So if you liked it, you can thank me by giving me a thumbs up for the algorithm and writing a nice comment below. You can also check out the other videos that I mentioned previously, including my startup vlog series over here, here, and here. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel over here, and I'll see you next time. Take care.